Hey everybody, welcome to episode 45 of Pealed Back's LiveCast Conversations With. As always, I'm your host, Gene Bernier, the Enjoyment Coach. On today's episode, we have TC Carling on today. TC was named the Canadian Men's Health Foundation President and CEO on February 1st of this year. He rejoined the organization after previously holding the position of Senior Vice President in 2014. Over the past 20 years, TC has gained valuable leadership experience holding executive roles with the Canucks Sports Entertainment, GSL Group, and most recently as President and CEO of Fortius Sport Health. He's also experienced in nonprofit sector, serving on the board of directors for Anxiety Canada, Big Brothers of Greater Vancouver, and CMHF. TC is a dynamic senior executive with a proven history of empowering staff to exceed goals and objectives. He lives with his family in North Vancouver, BC, and is an avid sports fan who enjoys hiking, exploring the North Shore trails with his family and friends. TC, thank you very much for being on the show.
I appreciate it, Gene. I did a good job with my creative writing there to make it sound like I was really important.
Well, you are, sir. You are, yes. Right? It's always interesting hearing those bios being read back. Almost everybody has a bit of like was that really me? Okay.
Exactly. Thanks for having me.
Well, no problem at all. Well, something really exciting is happening today. It's the June 30th, which is the last day of Men's Health Month for this year, which is an incredible feat. Would you care to share a little bit about what's happened for Men's Health Month and the transition from it being just a week to a month this year?
Yeah, of course. So the Canadian Men's Health Foundation's done a great job since 2014 of sort of planting their flag for Canadian Men's Health Week, which has historically been the third week of June, which coincides with Father's Day, and it's been driven by thought leadership and research, and it's made an impact recognized by the Canadian federal government, Health Canada, and other organizations across Canada. But, when I joined the organization, I reached alignment with the group right away that, what better than a week? Why not make it a month? And we really wanted to step into an important space, and that was men's mental health. We aligned ourselves with a strategic partner in Anxiety Canada, and we started to partner with like-minded individuals, subject matter experts, and delivered 8 live events for the course of the month, 4 of them speaker events with a unique and different topic each week, and 4 fitness events led by Tommy Europe. And we wanted to give men a tool from the toolbox from Don't Change Much. And in this case, it was movement. And the campaign was called Move for Your Mental Health. We wanted to get men and their families talking, which is important, learning and doing something about it. Give them a tool to improve their mild to moderate stress, anxiety, or loneliness that could have been brought on by or amplified by the pandemic.
Right. And definitely over these last 18 months, all those things have definitely been amplified and been brought up a lot more. There's a lot more stats and things that are coming up showing that depression, isolation, and all the things that we probably knew were happening have just been amplified and brought to the forefront, especially in men's health.
Yeah, for those of us with anxiety, what we're looking for, what we're striving for, what we're longing for is a sense of certainty in what we're doing, or in one of the things we're doing. And I think the pandemic has probably been the most uncertain thing in a generation, or more than a generation, in all of our lifetime. Nobody really that's lived for the last 100 years or so has experienced something of this significance, of this magnitude of disruption to their life, not to mention health risks or potential loss of family or loved ones. So, but just the day-to-day impact that the pandemic has had on people, whether it be the lack of social connection, your kid's school, your place of work, your recreational activities, the time you spend with your family, your inability to travel, whatever it's been, each day for the better part of a year and a half has been laced with a sense of uncertainty. And for those that understand or have experienced anxiety, that's a feeling that we're familiar with, and we try to find tools to navigate. But I think for a lot of people, it's been a bit of a leveling of the playing field, because for those that have never had many mental health challenges in the past, there's been a bit of an unknown feeling, like, what is this feeling I have? And it's a feeling that essentially all of us have had. I talked to Simon Whitfield a few months ago, who ended up being one of the keynote speakers in our the Power of Movement second week speaker event. And I thought he had an amazing way of putting into perspective the pandemic. He said, for the first time in all of our lives, everybody who pulled up to the four-way stop was thinking about the same thing. And it really resonated with me, like whatever that might have been, I thought it was a really unique way to, it's connected, even though we've been separated physically, it's connected us in many ways because we're all been facing similar challenges each day.
Oh, 100%. It's a great leveling. That was something that I referred to it on earlier back last March, is that it was a great leveling. Didn't matter your status or who you were or what you did or where you lived. We were all experiencing the same thing at the same time. And that hasn't happened for over 100 years.
No, and for the first time. Like nobody's experienced this. There's been hardship and tragedy and natural disasters and other things that have impacted certain areas or certain people or at certain generations at different times, but not one thing. And there have been pandemics before, as we know.
Yeah.
But for the most part, many people have been safe or isolated from the day-to-day impacts of those. And this is the first time that's not been the case. And it's been a great learning experience, I think, in some cases, obviously one that we all wish we'd never been through. But yeah. Actually, I asked Simon that particular day for a silver lining of the pandemic. I think we can all agree that it hasn't been, there haven't been many good things about it, but there have been silver linings, whether that's more time with your kids or the ability to maybe slow down and decompress a little bit, or spend some meaningful time around your core group of people in your home or what have you. So.
What have you taken as your silver lining out of all this then, DC? Because you've had quite a lot of change and uncertainty go on in this last little while, especially around like career and everything.
Yeah, I have. The simplest silver lining is so elementary school in North Vancouver wrapped up yesterday. It looked like it was going to wrap up Monday with the first ever heat cancellation, but they did get back to school for half a day yesterday. I walked my daughter to school, I believe, every single day this past year. And so there's two silver linings there. One is that it was a safe environment that they could keep the schools open in the Lower Mainland and in BC for the whole year, which was incredible. And I used to leave from my previous job. I'd leave home at 6:15 every morning. I would make every effort to be home for dinner, for a family dinner, but I left every morning at 6:15. So I didn't see my wife or my daughter before I left home in the mornings. And I used to travel prior to that for another job a lot. And here I did. I think I walked her to school every single day this past year. So that's probably the easiest connection to draw the silver lining. But I think, and we might get into it more later, but I think it just reaffirmed that even though it might feel uncomfortable at times, I have been, and we have collectively been, pretty resilient. And I think that's hopefully something we can take forward, moving forward, is that things are challenging, but if you dig in, you can find your way through it.
So, from your conversation, or what you were saying, it sounds like when you talked about we suffer from anxiety, like this is something that you've had and struggled with in the past. Then, is that a correct understanding of that?
Yeah. I would say I've had lived experience for 35 years. That's how I would identify it. It's episode 45, which is fitting. I'm 45, at least for a little while longer. And I, due to circumstances when I was young, I would say I didn't know what it was when I was that age, but I would say now, looking back, that it's been there for 30 plus years, 35 years, probably around the age my daughter currently is. And I've just found ways to navigate it and try to be as successful as I can in my personal and professional life. And so far, so good anyway.
So through all of this is like, how has it redefined your relationship with uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't like it at times.
Yeah.
When I think what people need to know about anxiety, that I guess what I would call mild to moderate or manageable, which is probably where I would sit, is that with the right tools, you can navigate it on a daily basis if it's that frequent. The reality is it's not that frequent, but when it's there, I wouldn't call it a love-hate relationship because I don't like it. I think there are some double-edged swords. There are things that have shaped me that have led to a lot of positive outcomes. I'm very driven and motivated, and I try to be empathetic of others as a result. But I don't like it. I'm not going to lie about that. But I do use physical activity as a tool, not because of the past month, but because of the last 20 or 5 years or so, knowing that it was a very effective tool for me. So.
Right. Yeah, no, obviously physical activity has a huge amount of benefits around depression and more information coming out around anxiety and just mental health, period, right? We're meant to move. So getting that out there and getting the body flowing can do some incredible things to help calm and settle some of that stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things I do in addition to, I try to build as much structure into my day and my life as I can, because we know that there are things that are unstructured and out of our control. And so the areas where I can build structure, whether that be discipline with my time or a routine or the physical activity or other responsibilities I have, I try to build those in, because they're also tools and they're things that are effective and I think make you more resilient against the things that you can't control.
Right. It's for what I hear from that is like building that structure and knowing that there is chaos and uncertainty that is out there that is uncontrollable. It's going to happen. So if you have these structures in your life that you've got these little vertical slices of where you can have that control, where you can bring it back in, does that then allow for more, maybe enjoyment's the wrong word, but being able to like be in the middle of the chaos a little bit, resiliently?
Yeah, it's funny. Like even in my professional career, like in the past, I've had some jobs that, they are very much, desk jobs and white collar jobs. And I haven't been on the front lines or saving lives or doing any of that really important work. But I've had some jobs in the past that are quite honestly very volatile. Like I was in the senior communication roles for a long time, and you can have the best laid plans, but the reality is you're coming at things in a very reactive mode at any given time, especially when you're working for a brand or brands or companies that are high profile and must be nimble and react to their external environment on a very regular basis, and in cases in a high profile manner. So I found that I was able to at times thrive and enjoy that environment when you might think that the opposite was what I would gravitate to. But so maybe that's one of the examples of where just being sort of in that state of understanding that things aren't always comfortable has been okay. As I said, I think certainly as I get older too, I think I like, and maybe I would have liked this no matter how I was wired, but I like structure as much as I can. If I schedule structure, then it allows for some flexibility when it comes to the unstructured part as well. Right. And I will be honest, and you've been there too, and I'm sure a lot of the people that watch and listen to the podcast have as well. But when you add a child to your life, you take a lot of the structure and predictability out. And so, and my daughter's 9.5. So, I had a fairly structured routine for quite a while. We were a little late to the parenting game. I was 36. So that definitely takes some of the structure out, and that can be good too. So.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I've got kids as well, and they're, no matter how old they are, there's always that unpredictability component with it, right? Or working around their schedules and structures and trying to balance and find harmony for work, life, being an adult, and still being a partner to our wives too, right? So like it's there's a lot to juggle sometimes.
Well, there is, and I think to tie those 16 months together that we've just been talking about. Those lines have been so blurred the last 16 months too. I mean, today was my first day probably since September where like Elsa was home all day because school's over. And so these next 10 weeks we will navigate with, in our case, with a virtual office, which a lot of people still have, or they're still working from home by choice or necessity or what have you. And we'll navigate that. And that's obviously something that none of us had really experienced in the past, not necessarily working from home, but working from home, schooling from home for a while, parenting from home, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's just about finding whatever that structure is. And I was talking to my wife about this last night. She's trying to map out the next, I guess, 10 and a half weeks of the summer break. And I said, I think, I felt like at times during the pandemic in particular, we were in a day-to-day situation. Like we didn't know schools would be open, business, whatever it was. It seems a little more predictable where we sit right now. But I said at the same time, like, I think we should just be looking at what's our week ahead? Like, what's your work schedule? What's my work schedule? What's her potential camp schedule or childcare schedule or what have you? And then we'll move on to the next week. Like, to try and figure out what the third week of August looks like right now, it's just it seems unrealistic. So.
Well, I think that can be like brought back into like the business world and everything. Is like there is a certain component of like that aspirational, like what is that goal we want to have for our family, and how do we know we're achieving it versus being in the trenches going, what's happening this week? Oh, a camp came up, or oh, somebody's sick, or oh, an awesome opportunity's come up for us to go somewhere. Like, be working towards that goal while still having the flexibility within the day-to-day to get you there, to be able to still, have those, more or less the feelings that you're looking to live up to, the values, versus having to have the right check marks checked off.
Yeah, and I think I'm guilty of this, as many of us are, but I think it's maybe looking for the small wins and the progress along the way. Yesterday, we took a moment of pause, my wife and I. It was the last day of school. As a proud parent, like our daughter got a fantastic report card. That's terrific. And there's this sort of, I think as we ladder up, she's only just finished grade 3, but that's a big deal to us at this point. It'll be maybe a lesser deal when she finishes grade 7 or grade 10 or grade 12 or university. But right now it's a big deal. But we did take a moment to pause yesterday to think about what we had been through with her to get her through through grade 3, through the end, a 3-month shutdown in grade 2, and then an entire year in the middle of a pandemic, and what that was like on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm glad that we did that yesterday, because I think most times we can be guilty of not doing that and not pausing for a minute and sort of giving each other a high five and saying, I think collectively here we can pat ourselves on the back for getting this far.
Well, I'm a huge proponent of celebrating the little wins and the progress, right? Because sometimes that gets so easily lost in the whole like day to day and like the chasing of the what next, right? Is like taking that moment of reflection and looking back and going, what is it that we accomplished? What is it that we can actually be really proud of, right? Because I think I think people get really tied into wanting to see where that future is and forgetting like our real successes in our past. And if we're looking to anchor, how do we celebrate that? How do we go back if we're having a low moment going, have I ever accomplished any of these things in the past? Anchoring back to it. And those reflection points, I think, just kind of create like a bright spot in the memory film for that.
Yeah, I agree. And I used to work with somebody that I really admired. He was a senior executive in one of the companies I worked with, and he was a mentor, and I admired him. But he had this saying, which on one hand I really resonated with, and on the other hand I thought, no, I think there's got to be more to it. He used to say, my car only has a front windshield. I have no rear view mirror. And he was always looking ahead and what's next and what's next. And there's a certain part of that I really admire. And but I also think that you need to look, to your point, you need to look at the milestones and the wins along the way. Because if not, you're just constantly chasing something. And if you're constantly chasing and chasing and chasing, are you ever actually getting there? And I think that's something we have to be mindful of. And I think when I was younger, I was always chasing what was next, and in my professional life and even in my personal life to a certain extent when it maybe came to physical activity or what have you. But at some point you need to be proud of some of the accomplishments and then
Oh, 100%.
While still chasing and not giving up on goals. I think goals are a huge thing, but when you achieve a goal, don't just move on to the next one before you think about what you just achieved.
Well, yes, 100%, right? Like it's interesting because I've had mentors and stuff that have had the very similar mindset about looking out the front window all the time. It must be a great business metaphor from back in the day.
In some book somewhere.
But I forget what book I was just reading. I think Super Freak Economics is around that hindsight is like you can't see hindsight while you're doing it or while it's happening. It's everything's about the past and taking that moment to actually understand it and how powerful it is to actually look back and knowing that just because you take a moment to pause the car and have a look out where you've been and understand the miles and understand what it took to get there doesn't take away from the fact that you're going to be looking out the front window, right? I think there was always that misalignment with that metaphor. And, I think I agree with you there is that there's a misalignment around it is that you actually need to do both. You need to be looking around. A good driver is looking out the mirrors to see what's going on and where they've been and to understand what's happening and looking at the map and understanding the path they took to be able to get to where they need to go.
Yeah, I agree. I probably agreed with about 75% of it. And there was this like 25% where I was thinking, there's those milestones or signposts along the way that will actually help you in the future as you keep looking through that front windshield. And you need to be able to mark them as you're going along, even if they're small wins or even if they're setbacks. Yeah. How can it help you in the future as you constantly are looking through that front windshield?
Yeah, because if you don't put those mile markers out there and you have to turn around, how do you know where was that last spot that you had that success? Or, like you're going to get lost when you come back. I think that probably goes to that whole like chasing, be like, if you're chasing and only looking out the front window, how do you know that that's not a path you've already taken if you're not aware, have that situational awareness?
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
So what, you had obviously an opportunity to come back to Men's Health. What was the biggest driver and excitement that you had stepping back into the organization and now as the leader of it as president and CEO?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One is, when I joined the organization originally in 2013, 2014, I really believed in Dr. Goldenberg's mission and Wayne Hartwick's leadership and what they were setting out to do to help men and their families across Canada. That never changed. Professional circumstances took me in a different direction, and I learned from those, and I benefited from them, and I'm grateful for having had them. When this opportunity presented itself, it was the right time, the right role, in an area of passion, personal and professional passion for me that never changed during those 7 years. I sat on the board of directors for that duration, so I continued to remain committed to the board. I admired where Dr. Goldenberg and Wayne and the team had taken the organization, and I saw the opportunity to continue to build off of their successes while stepping into some additional spaces where I think there's an opportunity to be real leaders in Canada. And so how do we take that lifestyle health programming, which is really resonating with men, and step into an important space such as men's mental health, which is there it's there to help other people. The opportunity is there 365 days a year to be leaders in this country, to partner with strategic partners that do good work or subject matter experts, and bring those two sort of core programming initiatives together over the course of a whole year. And what I liked about the campaign was we could just go and take something off the shelf that Don't Change Much campaign had been amplifying for 7 years, because it ties right into the mental health aspect of it. As we know, you can't have one without the other. You can't be physically well if you're challenged mentally. And if you're challenged mentally, there's going to be some physical ramifications, whether it's you're not sleeping properly, you're not eating properly, your weight's going up, your weight's going down, cholesterol, your heart, what have you. Now there's an opportunity to really amplify programming in one area while still serving that core audience in another.
And that's a pretty exciting spot to be jumping into, right? Like there's lots to be done the work will never be done. So that's like a beautiful role to have, is when you're working with something that the work continues to have to go on. What are you most excited about taking as a reflection point for, the last 30 days? There's been a lot of great content and messages that we've shared through those videos. What do you take from that to move forward into this next chapter of the foundation then?
So some goals outside of the metrics or analytics that we will, put a bow on here in the next few weeks, which will show, I think, the success that we've had, was how do we continue to build awareness for this organization? How do we build rich content? How do we step into a space that's there to be stepped into and start to take that first step to be leaders in Canada? And how, at the end of the day, do we most positively impact men and their families? So that was what I on behalf of the organization wanted us to strive for, and I believe we've achieved that. So that's now the launching point, I think, for everything that comes next. You talked about the wins. It's interesting. I worked in professional sports for 18 years in a front office position, and one of the biggest pivots and learnings for me in this business, both 7 years ago and then now, because I worked for 13 years in pro sports prior and 5 or 6 years in between, was in pro sports, there's a very defined winner and loser every second day. In baseball, it's every day. In football, it's every week. And in hockey and basketball, it's basically every second day for 7 months. You win, you lose. There's no gray. You know where you stand. That's not the case where we are. This is we're in a long game here. We're in a marathon, not a sprint. So you look for those markers along the way, I think, where in this case, for example, for Move for Your Mental Health Month, one of the biggest markers of success for us has been the incoming inquiries that the organization has received, is how can I get involved? We really like what you're doing. How can we take the next step with you? And I think that's one of the biggest markers of success for this organization right now, is that's what's happened over the last 30 days. And now it's upon us and our team to step into it and keep building off of that momentum.
It's pretty exciting to be able to see that shift, people asking, and there's obviously a recognition, which speaks to the awareness. And now already by leading with something like Men's Health Month is giving those organizations a hook or an anchor to start to jump into it, going, we see it and we don't know what to do. What's that's right next step? So it sounds like your role is to help people understand what those steps are and to give them opportunities to be engaged, however they choose to be.
Yeah, we've got a really good team at CMHF, and I think that we knew that this subject matter that we were introducing would resonate. It did, and I think maybe even more so than we had even hoped. And some of that's the quality of content, some of that's the strategic partners we use, some of that's the social influencers. But more than anything, I think it's the subject matter. Yeah. I think it was the right time. I've said this before with some friends and stuff. When it comes to the mental health space, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going back in. There's so much talk about stigma and other things as it relates to it, but I think those walls will come down, and as they come down, they won't go back up. It'll just be the way it is. I even just see the way my daughter speaks about certain subjects that she learns about at school, the inclusiveness, the communities that she understands and learns at a much higher, quicker rate than I ever did at that age. And I think as we start to just chip away, all of us collectively, not just this organization, but all the other organizations across Canada and elsewhere that are making meaningful impact in these areas and others, that once the walls come down and the genie comes out of the bottle, it's not going back in. And so I was telling one of the team members recently is that really the goal should be that we do such an effective job that it's so normalized that we put ourselves out of business. But I think at some point that's still a long way away, and there's so much work to be done to get there that I feel like we can feel secure for a while. If we build compelling program, people will still find it meaningful.
Well, yeah, and that goes to that whole, like, the work is never done, right? There's no person that's being brought into this world and exists right now has the handbook on how to live, a truly healthy life. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's really difficult to sift through it. So being able to have an organization that is powered with partners that already have tools and things along those lines, like Anxiety Canada, for example, has their app that helps around anxiety and calming their mind, right? And there's so many other tools that can be used that, as an organization, you and your team are able to do some incredible stuff.
And I don't think as a human being or our goals are ever going to be not only because it's unrealistic, but I don't even think is what we should strive for is just this perfect life in a straight line with no adversity, because that's not realistic. I faced some adversity when I was growing up. It shaped the way I am. I would prefer that my daughter not face some of that same adversity, but she needs to find some adversity. And I'm a massive sports fan. We may get into that as we go along, but what I like about sports, and I'm sure there's other creative outlets that do it as well, but there's some controlled adversity in some respects. Like if the worst thing a young boy or girl learns is that they got cut from their rep team, or they didn't score the goal, or they let the goal in, or they missed the shot, or what have you, that's okay, because in reality, those little nicks along the way will build them up as they go along. And ideally, I think, I don't know if you agree with this as a parent, but ideally, you'd like your kids they need to face some adversity, but you'd hope it's pretty non-traumatic and adversity that will shape them in a positive way moving forward, but not leave marks for a long time. But they just we cannot. My goal for the next 45 years is not to live a perfect straight line. My goal is to bring in these tools and this sort of armor that when I need it, I can use it.
I'm sitting here just giving you the pray hands, is because I am 100% behind that, right? I truly believe that kids need to be able to have that space to, trip, fall, get bruises, and have problems, and have the parents there that are able to allow them to kind of like pick themselves up a little bit and experience it. Because guess what? As soon as they become adults, that's going to happen. There's no stopping it. That does happen. And they need to be able to have the strength, the resilience, which you talked about earlier, to be able to learn how to get over that. And I guess that pulls right back into our looking out the back window, is when they're adults and they have a big stumbling block. Maybe they can look back to their sports when they got cut from the rep team and what did it do? Did it drive them, or did it pull them into the ground? Did they have the right supports? Who was there to help to support them? Did they learn to get mentors and listen and take advice? All those things are just so critical, and it doesn't happen without a little bit of adversity. Your muscles don't get strong if there's no resistance. And that goes along for, I believe, like everything, our mental health, all things around spiritual mental health has to have some resistance for us to get stronger with it, or else we're going to be weak, and it's going to pound on us if we don't.
Yeah. And again, back to a sports analogy or a sports reference, but even the absolute greatest of all time in their respective disciplines, quite honestly, lose far more than they win.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about the winning quarterback in the past Super Bowl, because it wasn't Patrick Mahomes, but the reality is he's won 7 Super Bowls. That's unbelievable. That's an incredible accomplishment.
Yeah.
He's played 22 seasons in the league, though. So for 15 seasons, failure is a strong word, but he fell short of his goal.
Yeah.
The person over my shoulder, arguably the greatest team sport athlete of all time, won 6 championships in nearly 20 years. So for 12 to 14 years, he didn't win. The greatest individual athlete I have ever seen, Tiger Woods. He won at a clip in a sport where people win less than 1% of the time. He was winning nearly 25% of the time. It's unthinkable.
Yeah.
That means he'd still lost or did not win 80% of the tournaments he entered. But every one of those, I think, made them hungrier to win the next time.
Well, I think Tiger's like an excellent example around that, right? Because he had went from a big streak, and then he had a drop off, and part of that was him relearning his swing and adjusting his swing. He took the time, and he took the perceived losses to learn, and actually made his game better because he understood how much he needed to progress. And I think that's sometimes that's missed, is like, okay, you might be doing well, but what if you tweak something? Are you willing to take that ego hit for a little bit to know that you can achieve so much more?
Yeah, that story you're referring to is an incredible story. That was fairly early in his career. He was the number 1 ranked player in the world, and he said to his coach, "We need to strip it down. I'm not going to reach my full potential where I am right now." This is the number 1 player in the world at probably 23 years old, and then he went nearly a year and a half without winning, and then just the story is he called his swing coach. He said, "I got it."
Yeah.
And then he just went on a streak that will never be duplicated in the sport. But he was willing to take that step back in order to take 100 steps forward in his case.
Well, exactly, right. It is about understanding is like, what is that right time to take that step to create a little bit of space to really refine it and like strip it all apart and leave nothing as sacred to how is where you're at the plateau, the ultimate, or is this just the launch pad to get you to that next part of that means you're gonna have to rebuild the rocket and really go.
And I don't know if you would agree, I think we're of similar age, but I think some of that's learning along the way. Like the fact that he would have learned that at such a young age professionally. I mean, maybe the argument is that he was a prodigy and had been at it for nearly 20 years by that point. But for most of us, that would be highly uncomfortable in our teens or early 20s as we're starting out. We are, I think, very risk adverse to taking a step back to go forward. I think as we get a little bit older, we understand what the ultimate payoff might be. But then it can come later in life. It comes with other risks. We may have financial responsibilities or parenting responsibilities, or a sense of needing to support your family, and that taking a step back could also be scary then too. So
well, humans are, we're documented research. We will avoid risk at all costs, even if it means we can go off and get a big gain if we took that risk, right? So it does take a component of awareness to be like, okay, I hear the fear and I'm still willing to overstep it, knowing what can happen, because I've looked back in my rearview mirror and I know I can handle it. If it all falls apart, I can rebuild it.
Yeah. And
that can be an extremely fearful, talk about uncertainty, area for some people.
For sure. I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, TC, I told you that we were going to get to a point that I'm going to look up and be like, it's past 35 minutes. I want to be respectful of your time. And we haven't even talked about Patrick Mahomes yet. So
we got another 35 minutes? What do you want? My monologue on Patrick Mahomes?
I would love to hear why he stands out for you.
Well, so I am a avid sports fan, I referenced, but my favorite sport and favorite franchise is the Kansas City Chiefs of all things. I joined the Kansas City Chiefs fandom when I was 14 years old, so 32 years ago. They never accomplished anything during that 30 years. I don't know why I do know why I latched on. At the time, they played in the same division as the Seattle Seahawks. They would be on TV. They had a star linebacker named Derek Thomas. I just loved the way he played, and I gravitated to the team. And away I went. Little did I know the next 25 years were going to be awfully less than fulfilling. But I loved it. And then this young man showed up 3 years ago, and I pointed to Michael Jordan over my shoulder. My favorite teams in my time as a sports fan, so 35 years or so, have never had this person here. Never had somebody of that magnitude. And I honestly wholeheartedly believe they do now. And he's an amazing player. And they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. They played it in this year, of course, and lost. It was worth the wait. It was awesome. And it's, and I think in life, we've talked about a lot of fairly serious subject matter. It's really awesome to have something that at the end of the day is so highly unimportant, but that brings you joy. And through all the ups and downs, I have put a disproportionate amount of passion into something that at the end of the day doesn't change my life in any way.
Yeah.
But it brings me great joy. And it was awesome to watch them win. And I know when the Red Sox won, I think in 2004, they hadn't won in 86 years. And there was this sort of famous saying in some books that were written called "And Now I Can Die in Peace." And because people have been raised for an entire generation on this super fandom of the Red Sox and never seen them win. And I live in Vancouver. I worked for the Canucks for 18 years, and there's a deep passion for this team. And it's been 52 years. And in the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's, people like to have fun at their expense, but it's been 54, 55 years. And as a fan who never got to experience it, it was awesome. And now I actually am selfish because I think it's going to happen again multiple times in the next decade. He's 23 years old, and it's awesome.
So now that maybe we'll be living in a post-pandemic and travel ability world, if he goes to the Super Bowl, can we expect to see you there in a stand cheering him on?
Well, now you're going to learn something about me. So I've actually been to Kansas City. I went a couple years ago. American Thanksgiving weekend. He was actually the backup that year. It was his rookie year. He sort of redshirted or apprenticed under their starting quarterback, Alex Smith, which turned out to be absolutely the right decision. And he's just been on a rocket launcher ever since. But I like watching sports by myself in a totally controlled environment. And so I've been to the Super Bowl before, not with the Chiefs in it. But no, I probably wouldn't go because I just love sitting here watching it on my own and running my own commentary and yeah, I tend to watch it if I can with my brother. He lives in Victoria. But now we're in different spots now because his favorite team is the Buffalo Bills, and now they're really good after 25 years of being horrendous. And now they might be the heir apparent to this team of mine, so we might not be on speaking terms most Januaries. Well, the Chiefs actually beat them last year in the AFC Championship game to go to the Super Bowl, so we didn't speak for a week or so. But that's
well, I can totally appreciate that, and having those sibling rivalries, be like, that's needed, and sometimes it happens as long as everyone can come back to the table. But it's thanks for sharing that. You enjoy watching that in your own way to enjoy it, right? And you made a mention about doing something that doesn't necessarily move your life forward, and I found that striking in a way that if you didn't have that piece of enjoyment, I think that would take away from your life. So maybe it doesn't like move people forward. But I, as an enjoyment coach, I want people to be able to have those things to enjoy, those things that might inherently feel guilty to go do. Is like, you got to have those. That's the spice of life. That's like what you do everything else for, is to be able to sit down and watch that game and totally enjoy it without feeling guilty.
Yeah, no, I agree. I say it sort of tongue in cheek, but with all the serious things going on and the things you actually need to worry about, and your family, and obviously the last year and a half we've been inundated with that. But it does bring great joy and stress and all the, at the end of the day, it doesn't, like, win or lose, it doesn't change anything for me, but I do love it. And it's been something I've loved for a long, long time through ups and downs and different parts of my life. And it's just I love sports, and it just does bring me a lot of, I don't know if escapism is the right word, but it gives me something that I can sink my teeth into that's a little less heavy than some of the other things in our lives.
Perfect. I think we all need those. I think we all need those areas, and escapism isn't necessarily bad when it's used appropriately.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, TC, so I've got my one last question that I ask everybody. We're going to jump in my time machine. I'm going to set it to go back 10 years. We're going to open the door. You get to give yourself one piece of advice 10 years younger.
Yeah, I thought about that because I've watched your previous podcast, and so I knew the question was coming. And I think the message I would give myself would be that you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's interesting. I had this conversation with Trevor Linden once, obviously the great 20-year NHL veteran, and we talked about sort of the stage races, for example, that he would do in the road stage races that he would do as an amateur cyclist after his career in Europe and stuff. And he told me he would push himself to a point that he never would have pushed himself when he was 20 or 25 and playing in the NHL at a high level. Like, there had been a willingness to get so uncomfortable as time went on. And we would talk about this as it related to the young players on the Canucks, and they needed to get more comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think in life, hopefully that inherently happens. But I'm not anywhere near an elite athlete, but I know that I'm willing to push myself when it comes to my half marathon training. I'm not nearly as physically able probably as I was 20 years ago, but my mind is more able and willing to push to a place that's uncomfortable that will allow me to probably achieve more than I accomplished when I was 15 or 20 years younger. At some point that I will reach a point where that's not possible, but at this point it is. And so I think in my professional, personal, emotional life, I think it just is about becoming more and more comfortable being uncomfortable. So, and I think that happens with time, or hopefully it does. And so that's maybe what I would have told myself 10 years ago.
I love that message. It's I think it's a real powerful one. That's where a lot of the great growth comes from. Ties right back into adding a little bit of friction into the world.
That's right. Controlled adversity, maybe.
Controlled adversary. That's a great way of putting it. All right. Thank you so much, TC. I really appreciate, I know that you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time today to be on the show. And for everybody else, this has been episode 45 of the LiveCast Conversations With. Next Wednesday, we have Tony Armstrong on for episode 46. And we will see you all there. Have a great weekend.